All right, folks, before we head back to court, I want to bring in our guest for this hour. Joining us to discuss is former prosecutor, criminal and civil defense attorney Randolph Rice. Randolph, great to see you. As always, thank you so much for joining me here on the program. And first and foremost, I want to ask you about this witness. I like what the defense is doing with this witness. Cross could be interesting, but I like what they're doing with him, attacking some of the, really what I call the pillars of the state's case. There were really only four as far as I'm concerned. The inconsistent stories, the central premise of the idea that the attacker had to have a key, her lies regarding the relationship she had with Anita, saying that they were close to the cops, but really to others, they really didn't get along at all. And her own words, the fact that she said she did it at one point while she was drunk, also said to family and friends that Anita needed to die and perhaps didn't respond to her death the way a lot of people thought she would. And they're going through those first two with this witness. I like what they're doing.
Yeah, Michael, I think you're exactly right. I think they're doing a great job. And what this does is, I think this avoids the defendant having to take the stand because he's providing the explanations that she would have provided had she taken the stand. But they don't have to worry about him saying anything incriminating like she would say if she took the stand. So I think it's genius. He's doing a great job. He's laying all the inconsistencies out. I love it when he talks about when he went back and when she went back to her family's farm and there was some inconsistencies about the cheese dip or not getting the cheese dip. It doesn't matter. She still has her alibi that she's at her parents' farm away from where the defendant was killed.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it made me think about what this jury needs to do when they go into that jury room. The very first thing they have to do is check those inconsistencies, right? Because he's kind of downplaying them. So they don't really relate to the actual committing of the crime. And she never says anything like, oh, at one point that I was back there and then another point saying she wasn't. There are inconsistencies and how important they are. I think it's very important to the case. I don't think they're dispositive to it, but that's going to be their first order of business, right? Going back and checking those inconsistencies.
Yeah, I mean, this is really the state's case, is the inconsistencies is what they're sort of relying on because they don't have that direct evidence that she was the actual murderer. So they're saying, hey, look, here's a roommate. They had some falling out. They really weren't big fans of each other. She was inconsistent in the stories that she told, and therefore she must be the murderer. Well, that just doesn't seem to play because this expert, Mr. Kouns, is providing that reasonable doubt that the defense needs to say, hey, look, yeah, there's some inconsistencies, but that doesn't make her a murderer.
Yeah, we still have to wait to see how he responds to that cross-examination. But at the end of the day, let's go back inside that courtroom now. Well, the jury is hearing from Doug Kouns. He's an expert witness on criminal investigation for the defense. He's answering questions about how investigators interrogated the defendant while she was drunk. Let's listen. This was the end for the day. He'll return to the stand tomorrow, and the defense will continue their direct examination. Let's bring back in our guest, still with us, former prosecutor, criminal and civil defense attorney Randolph Rice. And Randolph, as I said again, this guy's got the bona fides. He looks the part. The way he's testifying is very, very credible. And as you said, it kind of allows them to not have to call the defendant to the stand. But I'm even saying this is an opportunity for them to even have a pseudo-closing argument because he's going through all the points in the case for prosecutors and basically saying, hey, these are the reasons why they don't make sense.
Yeah, he really is giving a closing argument through his direct examination. And the defense attorney is really just, I think, going to probably repeat what Mr. Kouns said. What also, Michael, you make a really good point, is that he is doing this with very little, except for the one time they had to remind him about who was there in that one interview. He's giving testimony without having to look at notes, without having to refresh his recollection. That is very, very strong in front of a jury because that exudes confidence, and confidence then makes you more believable.
Now, Randolph, you've been on both sides of the aisle, former prosecutor, criminal defense attorney. Where do you think the state's case stands at this point? Now, we're just beginning of the defense's case. And again, we both like this witness very, very much. But in terms of the evidence that was presented by the state, do you think they did enough? Again, it's a very circumstantial case, and I've seen a lot less evidence cause a conviction, mostly because one of the questions I have is, who else really would have done it? Without the sort of sexual component in this case, a third party is almost difficult to buy. But at the end of the day, what do you make of their case?
Yeah, I thought the state's case was a little thin from the get-go. And now as the case went on, yeah, I could see some of the inconsistencies. But now that the defense has this witness, this expert, former FBI agent, investigator, really poking holes in the state's case, the state is going to have to come back and hit a home run on the cross-examination of this Agent Kouns.
Yeah, I think they're going to have to work really hard on that cross-examination because, again, there's really only four things that make sense. And I think the central tenet of their case is that the person who got into the apartment had to have had a key. And I think that was a leap of faith he got to make that I think this guy hit very well and said, you know what? We don't know if the door had been open. We just don't know. And if the person escaped through the window. So these things, I think, are just really important to the defense's case.
Yeah, Kouns cleaned that up. And look, what if it was the maintenance worker? Wouldn't have the maintenance worker had a master key that would have allowed him to get into this apartment? So that's reasonable doubt. That's what the jury can hang their hat on and say, you know, this is one of the suspects. This is one of the possible scenarios. And thus, there is reasonable doubt in the state's case.
Yeah, and I don't know that her comments and the inconsistencies are enough to overcome that doubt. All right, Randolph Rice, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It was a pleasure to have your insights on the show. We'll see you again real soon, folks.